Today we are taking an important walk down the memory lane, history of Northwestern, via the Daily Northwestern. And the reason for doing it now is because we have really a very special announcement to make that has been in the works for about 2 years. The entire run of the Daily Northwestern back to 1871 has been completely digitized, fully searchable, including all the photo captions, and will soon be made available to all alums. It's already available. It's already available anywhere on campus through the campus network, and starting next month, it will be available through the just about to be launched alumni portal called RNU. We're very grateful. I'll mention a few acknowledgments that help make this possible. But any of you who had embarrassing school events, it's now all up there and searchable. You'll hear more about that in a moment from Kevin Leonard, the university archivist. I need to acknowledge quite a few people for this event and this remarkable program and the digitization itself. Notably, Dan Jones, here in the front. Dan Jones and his company, Newsbank, which I was familiar with decades before ever coming to Northwestern, well known to all librarians, really the premier newspaper digitizing and database development company in the world. And it would not have been possible without Dan's facilitating of having Newsbank do this digitizing to the highest possible quality. We're very grateful for his generosity. We could not have done this without Stacia Campbell of Students Publishing Company. Students Publishing Company actually owns the rights to the Daily Northwestern and not Northwestern University. So this was a three-way contract that helped us get this done between Students Publishing Company and Northwestern and Newsbank. The Medill School has been incredibly supportive of this evening's event, and the Northwestern Alumni Association, which has graciously allowed us to use the tent that they put up for reunions. There's several deans in the audience. Dean Ham of Medill, Sally Blunt of Kellogg, I believe, and Provost Linzer, who is all of ours boss, all of our deans' report to Dan. We have Steve Strawn, the chairman of the Library Board of Governors, and a large number of our board members here, and several university trustees, Dan himself, who's a university trustee, Deborah Brady, Peter Barris, Rich Dean. Please forgive me if I left additional trustees out. Christine, oh my goodness. One of our distinguished speakers, of course, is also a trustee, Christine Brennan. I could blame that on my script writers, but that would be inaccurate. Most important to all of us is our great president, Morty Shapiro, who's been incredibly supportive of the library and the archives and of these alumni reunions. Morty is going to make a few remarks. We're so pleased he could fit this in. As you can imagine, the schedule for this weekend is pretty intense. But now that he's done with the standoff negotiations that he had to do for this great weekend, he's going to, it's totally leisure right now for you, right now, Morty? Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Welcome to game day. No, this isn't game day. This is the Daily Northwestern event. I was confused. I was looking for the helmet to put on, not the Buckeye helmet, but the Wildcat helmet. It's an exciting weekend, and this is a great start for it, except for some of us who have already done several events and have other events to go to even after this one. But I love the fact that we're celebrating libraries and celebrating the Daily Northwestern. And Sarah, it's great to be here in front, on Deering Meadow, in front of Deering Library. And one of the somebody before said that they had met me for the first time when we reopened the doors that had been closed from 1971 to 2012, I think. It was a long time. And that was a glorious day. Anybody there when we opened the doors? Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Well, yeah, that was fun. It's so nice. And to see the purple there, and it's just, what an iconic building, isn't it? It's just beautiful. And what happens inside there is even better. So let me say something about the Daily Northwestern. I'm a very big fan. Maybe it won't surprise you, but if you ever hear me at any alumni event, I'm constantly telling all the parents and alums, go on the web, or even better, pay your money and get it and hold it in your hand, like the old days that I've never moved beyond. And, I love the Daily Northwestern, which is a little unusual, I have to say, for a college or university president. In fact, the one thing when we all get together, the presidents and chancellors, that everybody loves to harp against is the school paper. And at a recent meeting of a large group, they were going on and on telling stories, and I said, I actually love my paper, the Daily Northwestern, and I'm always telling people they should read it, and I read it every day, every word, every day. I learn so much, it's just great. And one of them said to me, but Mort, isn't it true? Don't you have really disengaged alums who write really nasty letters about you that they publish? Anybody see the one a couple of days ago? And I said, oh yeah, all the time. And they said, well, but Mort, don't sometimes organizations or individuals take out ads in the paper saying about what an idiot you are? And I said, we get full-page ads every Friday. Don't tear down Old Prentice, if you've seen that. So, that keeps the Daily in business. So I feel very proud of that. I don't agree with the guy, obviously, but I do love the way he supports the press at Northwestern. And then he said, Mort, but don't sometimes they write editorials or articles that you feel is a little slanted against you because you're the man? And I said, yeah, regularly they do that. And then they say, but yet you still love it? And I said, I love it. It's the press. Look, we have Medill here, okay, right? We have a great school paper, and I love the Daily. So I'm very, very supportive. But before I move on and I'll let Kevin take over with this, I want to tell one little story about how presidents and chancellors are typically treated at their school paper. So here's a quick little story. One day the phone rings in the president's office, and it's the editor of the school paper. And the editor says, can I speak with the president? The president gets on the line, and the editor says, look, I want to assign a reporter to follow you around so we could get to know more about you. And the president says, well, get more about me. Everybody knows me. They see me all the time at events and all this sort of thing. He goes, no. I'm not interested in what you do during the day. I'm interested in getting, the community wants to know more about you on your day off. Okay, so the president says, well, I take days off and stuff. And, I don't know if it's a good idea, but I got to support the school paper. So here's what I'll do. A week from Sunday, I'm taking that morning off before a brunch at the president's house. And, if you can assign a reporter to meet me early, like 7 in the morning, it turns out I like to fish, okay? And it turns out there's a pond, there's a lake about an hour or so away, and I have access to a rowboat. And if you send somebody, a reporter to the president's house 7 a.m. on Sunday, I'll drive, we can go out there, and they can watch me fish, and they'll get a little better insight into what I'm like outside my work job. So the editor says, great, it happens. Sunday comes, the reporter comes 6, 7 in the morning. They go out there to this lake, and it's a beautiful day, and they go out there in this rowboat, and, the president's sitting there, and he takes, puts a little bait on the hook, and, he's there with the reporter, and he casts out into the lake very proudly, beautiful cast and everything, and it immediately snags on some floating debris. And the reporter's thinking, oh, this is some fisherman here, right? He's thinking, oh, my God. But it turns out, so the president's nonplussed. He said, okay, no problem. So he hands the rod and reel to the reporter. And he said, would you hold this for a second? And the reporter does. And the president stands up, and he steps out of the boat and walks on top of the water. On top of the water, goes over to where the hook is tangled with some floating debris, untangles it, turns around, walks on top of the water, back into the boat, gets in. Nobody says anything. The reporter doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. It's like, an astonishing event, no mention of it. So everything goes on No other problem. Everything's normal. They get back. He gets back for his brunch. The reporter says, "Thank you, Mr. President," stuff. And well, the next morning, of course, the daily paper comes out, as it always does. And as is often the case, they drop off, usually about 11 a.m., a group of papers, a big stack of papers for the reception area in the president's lobby, as they do for me and Crown. And, you know, oftentimes when something important happens, you don't want to rush out there when they deliver it. You look too anxious, right? But you want to see what it is. So this president is waiting and waiting. Honestly, just think, how is the paper going to deal with this, you know, unusual event? So he goes there, and he sees it delivered, and he takes the paper, and he surreptitiously goes back into his office, and he looks at it, and there's this banner headline, like a World War II kind of headline, this thick. And you know what it says? President can't swim. So let me just tell you about the press. So that's a story that we love to tell, and it shows why you need a little thick skin when you're in these jobs. But God bless the Daily. I just love it. I might not be a great swimmer, but I love the press. So thank you. Have a great time, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend Kev. Thank you.
People, you know, it's a very special evening when the university president is your warm-up act. Thank you, Morty. So my name is Kevin Leonard, and I can't believe I just read that. My name is Kevin Leonard, and my title is University Archivist. Archives is a department of the university library, and our mission is to collect the really important records of the university, the official records, the personal papers of individuals with ties to the university, faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends. You can bet that all the distinguished panelists tonight will be hearing from me about their papers, probably with great frequency, and perhaps with some concern about the amount of contact that they get from me. The holdings of the university archives are massive, and they cover a span of time from the mid-19th century to the present. But central, the core of that collection, is the school newspaper. We know it now as the Daily Northwestern. It operated under other titles from 1871 up to the present. It is a detailed record of what went on in this Northwestern community over close to a century and a half. It's the memory of the Northwestern community. It is a very, very heavily used resource within the archives. It's essential to anyone who wants to know about Northwestern or people tied to Northwestern. We use it on a daily basis. However, it is a very difficult resource to use because for most of its history, it was hard copy, it was brittle, it was fragile, it was unindexed. Something else special happened in my life, in the life of the library and the archives, and that's Dan Jones. Alumnus Dan Jones walked into us with an offer that we couldn't refuse, and that is to digitize the Daily Northwestern. Dan has put together a fantastic company, Newsbank, and took on the responsibility of taking this wonderful resource over the past year or so, digitizing it, and it is now available to us on campus. It will soon be available to alumni. It is searchable. It is absolutely fantastic. We use it in the library dozens of times each day, and it has transformed the work of the individuals who come to us seeking information. Again, the Daily, its predecessor titles, wonderful resources, and thanks to Dan and thanks to Newsbank, newly accessible and newly available and used with great efficiency and great skill by our patrons. So Dan, thank you very much. The next order of business is to introduce my Northwestern colleague, Charles Whitaker, a fellow Northwestern alumnus. We're just a few years apart in our class years. Charles, my hair turned white. What happened to you? Charles has 2 degrees from Medill, 1980 and 1981. He's returned to campus as the Helen Gurley Brown Research Chair in Magazine Journalism. He served as chair of the board of directors of the Students Publishing Company, and that's the administrative entity that backs the Daily Northwestern and the school yearbook, the syllabus. He is an award-winning teacher, and he's here to run tonight's program. Charles.
I am truly honored to be a part of this celebration of the Daily Northwestern and the unveiling of this tremendous resource. Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. I've had a chance to take an early look at the digitized Daily, and it is amazing.
Oh my God.
It is.
Come on, look at the. This could get dangerous if they're doing that to everybody.
As I was saying, it is amazing. Once you have the opportunity to look at the resource, I assure you, you will spend hours poring through back issues of the Daily, mostly looking to see if your youthful indiscretions were covered and are available there, but also looking at the phenomenal history of this university. As Kevin said, the Daily is one of the most perused resources, and when you look at this history, you can absolutely see why. It's also a great honor for me to be called upon to be the moderator for this event and to be on the panel with the very distinguished alums who are going to join me. I have a confession to make. I did not work for the Daily, and I'm not nearly as distinguished as the rest of our panel. So in some ways, I feel like the gate crasher at a very elite party. But nonetheless, I have been charged with trying to moderate a conversation, and I look forward to speaking to our panelists and then engaging you in this conversation as well. So allow me to introduce and bring up the people who are going to join me in this conversation. First, we have my classmate, Christine Brennan, an award-winning USA Today sports columnist. Christine is a best-selling author and commentator for ABC News, PBS NewsHour, CNN, and NPR, and she's one of the leading experts on the Olympics and women's sports issues. Next, we have Rance Crain. Mr. Crain is president and editorial director of Crain Communications, Inc., which publishes about 25 business publications, including Advertising Age, Automotive News, and Crain's Chicago Business. He began his career as a reporter for Advertising Age, which he still leads as editor-in-chief and also contributes a bi-weekly column. We have George Lama. George is president and CEO of Answers Learning, a startup educational solutions company that he launched this year. Previously, he served as the external relations advisor to the Inter-American Development Bank, following a 30-year career at the Chicago Tribune, where he rose through the newsroom ranks from summer intern to Metro reporter, foreign and national correspondent, chief of correspondence, and ultimately managing editor for news. We have my colleague, Donna Leff. Donna's professor of journalism at Medill, where she's taught everything from urban reporting and science writing to media law and ethics. In addition to having 2 degrees from Medill, she also holds a doctorate in public policy from the University of California, Berkeley. We won't hold that against her. And is a faculty affiliate of Northwestern's Institute for Policy Research. Her research and teaching interests are in science and public policy, which are outgrowths of her award-winning investigative reporting for Chicago Today, the Chicago Tribune, the Ypsilanti, Michigan Press. And she's reported on political corruption in Chicago in the 1970s and was an assistant city editor at the Tribune. Last but not least, we're overrepresented by the class of '80, but we also have my classmate, Michael Wilbon.
I'm going to die for that picture.
We both had hair in 1980.
There's proof.
Michael, as many of you know, is a columnist and commentator for ESPN, where he's the co-host of the wildly popular Pardon the Interruption with his partner in crime, Tony Kornheiser, and appears on ABC's NBA Sunday Countdown pregame show. For more than 30 years, he was an award-winning columnist and sports writer for the Washington Post, where he covered Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the NBA, and 10 Winter and Summer Olympics. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. So I would like to start, since this is reunion weekend and we are taking a trip down memory lane, I'd like each of you to tell me as best you can what you remember about your very first time setting foot in the offices of the Daily Northwestern. First off, since you did not all step into the same newsroom, where was it? And what do you remember about it? Kristen?
Well, Charles, first of all, thanks, and it's great to be with you and great to be with everyone here. Thanks so much for coming on this fabulous homecoming reunion weekend. What an honor it is to be with all of you and great leaders in journalism and dear friends as well. And for me, the Daily was, of course, for us of a certain age group, was over at Norris on the 3rd floor. As one of my colleagues recently said, the best rim with a view anywhere in journalism, of course, looking out at the lake. Yeah. And this was spring quarter of my freshman year, our freshman year, so it was the spring of 77. And I was a little bit overwhelmed. I know we have some students in the audience and some Daily editors. And I was, as much as I was confident and wanted to be a journalist and knew that this was it and only applied to Northwestern, early decision, got in, and that was it for me. I remember my parents saying, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I am sure. Northwestern journalism, done." Still, there was that sense of, oh boy, this is it, as I'm really going to embark on my career in journalism. So it took me 2 quarters till spring quarter. And it was, George, your classmate, our dear friend Chris Spolar, sorority sister from Chi Omega, who said, "You're going in there with me today." And so we walked over I lived at the complex, and walked over and walked in the door. And I don't think she literally shoved me in, but almost. And I'm here to say to anyone who has doubts or wonders, the thought that this is it, this is going to be my career, and this is that step, sounds silly to me now, but that's what I really felt. And so, anyway, bottom line is I walked in the door. To the left was the off-campus bureau. Michael Bennett was the off-campus editor, also George's year. And they were looking for someone to write the news shorts that day from around the country and the world, off of the wire. I guess we had UPI, I believe, that came in. And so I typed up 4 or 5 news briefs, and that was my first experience at the Daily. Within a few weeks, Charles, Dean Murphy and I were sent out to do price surveys at all the grocery stores, at the hair salons, and whatever. So Journalism 101, we're actually writing down the prices of all of the items on the store and doing comparisons with other grocery stores. More than once, we had managers of these stores come over to us and ask us what we were doing. But we told them that we were doing journalism, and that, in fact, we were as we started our careers. And Dean, of course, is now a top editor at the New York Times and a dear friend to this day. So that was really how I got started.
Rance, what do you remember about the first day?
Well, our office at that time, I graduated in 1960, so this was 59, was in the basement of the Medill building. And so, you know, you had to go down the stairs into a very, to me it was very impressive and overwhelming because the people at the Daily at that time were very serious people. And I was like a sports guy. I wanted to be a sports editor, but they were and big-time journalists too. Our editor was a guy named Walter Rugaber, who did a really great job on the Daily, but he went on to be publisher of 3 or 4 newspapers in the South. Hope Justice was our managing editor. She went on to become the editor of succeed Walter. And then Bob Goldsboro was the news editor. And Bob, after graduating, worked for the Chicago Tribune for about 21 years, I think. And then after that, he worked for us, our company, Crain Communications, on Advertising Age for 23 years. And Bob Goldsboro, by the way, is the guy who writes the Nero Wolfe mystery novels. After the guy who wrote it died, he got the license to do it, and he's a terrific writer. But I was very, very impressed with the people who I was surrounded by. I will tell you that.
George?
Well, I'm from the city, not too far from here. I grew up in Uptown, right down the lake, but another world away. And I never worked on my high school paper. I was kind of stunned that I got accepted to Northwestern, and they gave me half the state treasury, it seemed, for a grant, so I could afford a scholarship so I could come here. And I thought, but I loved to read. My father, who was not an educated man, he was an immigrant. He never finished high school, actually, but he loved newspapers, and he gave me his love for newspapers as a boy. A guidance counselor in high school had said, you know what, you could go to law school. I was like, really? He said, no, you could. You have the grades, you could do it. And actually, good preparation for that is journalism. And I said, really? I had no idea. Nobody had ever talked to me in those terms. I love to write, I love to read, and so I applied, started looking into journalism schools, got into Northwestern. So fast forward, they accepted me, I'm here, it's my freshman year. I thought, well, I should go actually learn what it's like to write for a newspaper. And the only one that would have me was the Daily Northwestern. So it was on the 3rd floor of Norris. And I remember going in there and thinking it was dingy and kind of dirty. And there was paper all over the place. It was really loud. If there's any current students, we wrote on typewriters. There was an AP machine.
They have no idea what typewriters are.
No, I was a foreign correspondent filing on typewriters a few years later, but there was an AP machine, the wire machine. Literally, the roll of paper came up, and you had to scroll through the paper to see the story you're looking for and physically cut it off. And it was clackety-clack. It was really loud. The place was a dump. I started talking to people. They said, I said, so what's it like here? They said, well, here's the deal. You work really long hours. There's no clock here. This is like Vegas. We don't know what time it is. And the pay is really crappy. And I thought, this is glorious.
Sounds good to me.
Wonderful. And I immediately fell in love with it. Years later, somebody said journalism is an incurable disease, and I think I caught it at the Daily, but that's what I remember.
Very good. Donna.
Okay, well, first of all, it was not dirty at Norris. You have no idea what dirty is until you've been in the basement of Fisk Hall, which was windowless. And what I was actually really curious to ask Rance was whether the mural had been painted yet then. Because in order to cope with the fact that we had no windows in this really, really long, like it felt as long as this tent, maybe not, but somebody painted the beach. So we had like the fan, you know, and the water and the sky, and that's all we looked at. And we were always getting sick because we were always smushed in this room like the whole entire school year. Once you went down there, it is true, it's an incurable disease, and you never left. And also, nobody got paid anything except the editor-in-chief. Like finally, when I got to be editor-in-chief, we got a monthly salary, which actually was $125. I still remember that.
Very good.
Yeah, for a month. Which was less than my rent, which was $105, so there you go. But anyway, the other thing that was funny was I did look through the archives when Charles said they were available, and the first byline story I ever had in the Daily was a weather story, and it was about the snow. And that really made me laugh because that's exactly what everyone's first story is. Right. You know, at any newspaper, anywhere, if you go in the city room, you guys know that. They tell you to write the weather story, but that was not what the place was like. I mean, mostly it was extremely serious. We covered a lot of really hard news in the 60s.
Michael?
It was.
I haven't thought about this one time since the first day. And I don't know what money George is talking about because I never got paid a dime.
I was wondering what money George was talking
We
about
have an
either.
investigation into this money thing. I don't need any money.
We got a little bit, little money.
You know, Christine and I are classmates, and it took me 2 months to get my nerve up, two quarters to get my nerve up. Spring quarter, my freshman year, I walked in. I don't know who greeted me and said, what are you here for? And I said, I want to write for the Daily. And the person said, what section do you want to write for? And I said, is that easy? Sports. And I went over, and Helene Elliott was there. And Helene is our colleague, for those of us who have been in sports. She's been at the LA Times for forever. Still the LA Times?
Yeah, still there.
And Bob Thomas was, I think, the sports editor. And I went over and said I wanted to write for sports, and they said, okay, like, can you start tonight? I thought, this is pretty cool. And that was about the last time I ever set foot in the Daily offices.
Really?
Because that's not what sports writers do. There are no stories for sports writers in a newsroom. The stories are at fields and in gymnasiums, practice fields, corner offices where coaches sit, training rooms where equipment managers tape up elbows and knees, and in cars driving to Minneapolis for the Golden Gophers Northwestern game, or to Bloomington, or to, wherever it is we drove to, which was everywhere. And so I don't know that I ever went back to the offices. And I worked for the Daily for 3 years. I think my first byline story, was about a young woman who was officiating her first game in intramurals. And it was my first story. And I had a byline, and I was thrilled. And I knew before I walked in the Daily that's what I wanted to do for a living, and I knew even more after that. And there were hot shots at the Daily. I mean, all these people were hot shots. Brennan was a hot shot. She won't admit it now. Christine was a hot shot. There were people who knew what they were doing. I had no idea. I mean, I was as terrified walking into the Daily the first day as I will be Saturday night when we kick off against Ohio State. And I hope Saturday turns out as well, as it turned out. So it was life-changing. I learned how to be a sports writer. Those clips got me internships. They ultimately got me to the Washington Post, where I spent most of my adult life until about 3 years ago. And I can't even think of my life without it. And for me, I just tell you a quick story. I had a single right across the street at the complex, the Foster Walker Complex. I had a single room. We go on TN. You have to give up your room, right? This was a big deal. This was when everybody didn't live off campus and have a car, which I hear everybody does now.
TN, by the way, teaching newspaper for the old-timers, JR for the students today.
TN. So I go to Lafayette, Indiana. I have no housing. I come back, they're going to put me in housing with a roommate. I do not want a roommate. So I write a letter to whoever was in charge of housing saying, you know what? I'm going to be up every night writing on a typewriter. And I'm going to keep any roommate I have wide awake all night because I don't start writing until 1 o'clock, which was not a lie. I got my single back, the same room. And I wound up writing columns for the Daily, and I never started them as I do now until 2 a.m. And my wife says, this is just like college, isn't it? And I say, yes, it is.
Okay. Well, speaking of technology and or the lack thereof from our days, we are all from the antediluvian days of paste up, pica poles.
No, hot lead.
Hot lead, oh my gosh,
no.
So students of today, they push a button, it's gone. Tell us about what the bedtimes were, how you got the paper out, and managed to be a student at the same time.
Well, it was long hours. I mean, you're right, Mike. You were in the office, by the way, a couple times. I remember that. I saw you there. I know I did. But we spent, I mean, my goodness, I think we spent 8-10 hours a day, 5 days a week there.
What was the technology? How were you putting the paper together?
It was typewriters. And Stacy, of course, you were there, another class of 80, and still, of course, there, which is wonderful, what you're doing for the Daily, Stacy. We really appreciate it. And so typewriters, and we would, when cut and paste, we all know what that is now with the computer. Well, we were really cutting and pasting.
Literally cutting and pasting.
And I remember there was one poor kid, we would edit his story, and we were cutting and moving paragraphs around so much, I think the whole thing was just glue or tape. And but that's what we did. And then we would, as I recall, and Stacey, you can help us with this, we would then send it, we'd put it all together and send it down to Chicago. It would be printed, was it Newsweb? Newsweb. And we had to get it there every night, and then overnight it would be printed, and we'd have it back in the morning, it would be circulated around. Yeah. So it was, we were starting to use some of the technology that would be the forerunner for what we have today. But it was all typewriters, and it was all, and of course at Medill, at Fisk, it was all typewriters too, and it was just Fisk then, by the way. We didn't have McCormick and the Tribune Building. And I will say this, sounding very old and old school, there's something about thinking through your story so that when you write it on a typewriter, you can't move things around. And we're all, of course, now creatures of that. We can move everything around, change it, erase, start over. We really had to think it through. And I think that probably made us better journalists early, because you had to have the idea of your story, and yes, we did cut and paste things literally, but in general, you had to have that structure. You couldn't move things around very often. We also, of course, had pencils, and we would do the little carets and have the notations of where we were making those editing marks. So that was, and we made mistakes, and we learned, and I think that's one of the main things, as we all sing the praises of the Daily, that we got real-world, first-hand experience in doing what we were all going to end up doing.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, our extracurricular activity was also leading, as you might said, to the internships. All of us had 3 or 4 during our time here. And so, Charles, to me, it was pure fun. It was a delight. It wasn't drudgery. Every day, especially in January, walking towards the lake and the wind and the snow, it was just a delight because these were your best friends. You couldn't wait to see them again, even Wilbon, although you were there more than you said. And
Well, Christine, you probably didn't recognize, because you probably saw that guy. I don't know who that is.
it's Mike,
Mistaken identity.
As Mike and I, we met in September of 1976, and this is where you always say, don't tell them.
Don't
because
tell people
They
this.
can do the math. They know how old we are. But it was so much fun. And the great thing, and thank you to Northwestern, to Dan, what you're doing now, it was so much fun, ladies and gentlemen, but it was also preparing us completely and totally for our life's adventure. I don't even want to use the term work, because it's not work. It was what we were meant to do, and we were getting the best experience in the world doing it.
Anyone else? What do you remember? Rance, what do you remember about putting the paper together?
Well, we had, I was really lucky because in 1959 and 60, Northwestern had a good football team. We won, this is true, ladies and gentlemen, we won the first 6 games. We were number 2 in the nation. We got on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And the sad part of the story is we ran out of gas, lost the last 3 games. But there were a lot of great characters as coaches of the various teams. That was the days of Ara Parsegian. And of course, he was a great coach. And then, but the guy that I liked the best at Northwestern was the baseball coach. His name was Freddie Lindstrom. He was a third baseman, Hall of Famer, third baseman for the New York Giants. And he was a great interview. And one of the things that I'm so thankful for, by the way, for Northwestern, is all these things here are some of my old stories that they sent me from the archives. And I found one. And if I could just indulge everybody just for a moment. This is Freddie Lindstrom's greatest day in baseball. And this is how it started. It was the bottom half of the 13th inning, and New York Giant third baseman Fred Lindstrom was on the spot. The fans at the Polo Grounds that day in 1927 were sitting on the edge of their seats. After Hal Ryan of the Pittsburgh Pirates had belted an inside-the-park homer in the top half of the 13th, things looked bad for the New Yorkers. But Ross Young, leading off for the Giants, lined a single to center, and Ryan, the hero, only minutes before, booted a hard-hit ground ball from the bat of Frankie Frisch, the Giants' great second baseman. So with 2 out on the bottom of the 13th, with the Giants trailing 7-5, Fred Lindstrom walked to the plate. John McGraw, manager of the Giants, failed to flash the expected bunt sign, so Lindstrom asked him just exactly what to do. Hit the first pitch out of the park, McGraw instructed. Is that all? That's all. Lindstrom had his orders. Babe Adams, pitching for the Pirates, figured to taunt Lindstrom with a high outside fastball, but it wasn't quite far outside enough. Lindstrom hit the first pitch out of the park. After the shouts of congratulations died away, McGraw cashed in the glory. I'm entitled to half of that home run, Freddie. He said, after all, I told you what to do. He was a great guy. His other big suggestion to me that I wrote a story on was he suggested that the Cubs trade Ernie Banks.
How'd that work out?
Because they could have got a pile of great players for Ernie.
Sure. Yeah.
In terms of how the paper went out,
Yeah.
blessedly, I had nothing to do with it. Given my latter experience on the dark side as an editor. But what the people who did do it were spectacular. And I was really lucky to work with great professionals my entire career. And the lineup of editors, when I came into the Daily, the people I worked with, I joined the off-campus bureau right away because I wanted to write about things outside in the city, things of national affairs, international affairs. My editor was Geraldine Baum. Geraldine Baum just had a distinguished career at the Miami Herald, Pulitzer Prize winner at Newsday, Washington, Paris, and New York bureau chief for the LA Times. The managing editor was Craig Matsuda. He was a senior editor for projects at the LA Times, a long distinguished career there. The editor was Alan Gold. Alan was a national correspondent, environmental correspondent, and a ranking business editor at the New York Times. We had Matthew Purdy on the staff there who helped edit sometimes. Matt today is the associate managing editor who runs investigations for the New York Times. He and I have judged the Pulitzer Prize together. We had just an amazing Andy Fagelman who worked with us at the paper. I think Dean started there, Murphy. At a certain point, he's the business editor now of the New York Times. These, even as kids, they really knew what they were doing. And I got really good editing there, I thought. And it was a lot of fun. So that was part of what made it all really contagious. But it was a fabulous first experience there.
Donna, what do you remember?
Well, we called what you did cold type, and it was just starting then, the cut and paste, because we used hot lead. Literally, they were boxes, you know, and the reason a double truck in a newspaper is called a double truck is because there were two trucks. I mean, one on this side, one on this side, you know, lined down the middle and the lead in between. And what I remember the most about putting the newspaper together was we did it in Hinsdale. And then as now, there wasn't a very good way to get to Hinsdale from Evanston. So, you know, we were always experimenting. And we used to get there around 11 o'clock at night. And we'd come back sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning. This was while we were supposed to be in school, right? And the only thing I can remember about the print shop was Ken, the printer, always saying to me, my nickname was Rosie from my last name, Rosene. And he'd go, Rosie, I can't squeeze the lead. You gotta make this headline fit. And you know, we'd have to sit there and like take things off the headline until literally the lead fit in the box. So that's just how it was. And later when we got to cold type, it turned out you could actually cut the type apart and you could sort of squeeze it and paste it in there. So we really thought that was a great improvement. We didn't know about computers. So, yeah.
Michael, unlike Rance, you did not see a football team that was 6-0. That started 6-0.
0-6.
What was it like to be a sports writer in those days? You are, you know, of the school, and yet you're trying to write honestly about the programs.
Well, that's a great question. I grew up in Chicago, a Cub fan.
Yeah.
So I got the Cubs and the Wildcats there for a while. You know, we used to sort of joke, I think, in the 90s and the aughts. My mother, who grew up here and went to Loyola, would say, well, I'd like to see the Cubs win before I die. She is going to be 88 years old in March. Still hasn't seen them win. And now I am saying that to my son. And I think there is actually a correlation between this place producing so many sports writers and that. Mm-hmm. The greatest stories are in the losing. And I knew that before I got out of Northwestern. Mm-hmm. The thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, the greatest stories are the agony of defeat.
Interesting.
I mean that quite literally. You know, I know one of the best stories I've ever written was about, for those of you who might be from the Washington, D.C. area or Georgetown affiliated, Fred Brown of Georgetown mistakenly throwing the ball to James Worthy in the 1982 championship game. And I just followed Fred Brown around after that game and John Thompson, and it's a story that stays with me until this day. And people know Michael Jordan hit the shot, but there's no story there. He hit a shot. Yeah. Everybody hits a shot. The agony of defeat is really something that gives you great raw material for writing or producing anything. And sadly, there was far too much of that around here. I went to look up, but you know what? What you also discovered, there were people who were as dedicated to their craft in losing as those were in winning. Mm-hmm. I mean, Tex Winter coached here. Right. He's a Hall of Famer. He created the offense by which Michael Jordan won 6 championships. Yeah. And for those of us who got to know Tex Winter as students, that was a fascinating thing. I mean, there are all kinds of people who, Joe Girardi of the Yankees, who might be of the Cubs. I don't know what the news of the day is, but is that done already? Is there news? Joe Girardi went to school here. And it turned over, but I will say, the football team's record, I looked this up because I started thinking about what was the team's record when I was in school. It was 3 wins, 40 losses, and 1 tie. The tie, for those of you unfamiliar with this rich history, we decided to have a campaign one year to actually market the football team. And the marketing slogan was, expect the unexpected.
Yeah, I remember.
Labor Day Saturday, 1978, 77 or 78, Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, 0-0 tie, Illinois Northwestern. Expect the unexpected.
And then we lost 10 games in a row.
We lost 10
So
games.
the highlight of the season
Was
was
the
a
tie.
0-0 tie with Illinois.
So I never saw a win until my senior year. My sophomore year, we're sitting out here in the cold, and it's 7-0 Illinois, and they're marching down the field again. I said, that's it. It's on my birthday, 20th birthday, I guess. I'm driving home to the south side. I'm going to have my parents going to cook me dinner, make me dinner. On the way home in the car, we scored 3 touchdowns. I hear the victory, but I don't see it. So I had to wait. So I was a senior before I saw us win a game. But, it's interesting because there's so many people here. Mike Campbell's here. There's so many people here I lived with. And losing described a condition that was larger than them. It did not describe them. And some of my neighbors and best friends and people I had the greatest respect for by the time I left here had done incredible things here. And it sent me into my professional time with a different view of how things got done, how you won, how many people were fortunate to be in a position to win. And the easiest thing you could do was to simply go to Notre Dame. I mean, how easy was that?
Right.
And I gained a lot more respect for people who said, no, I'm going to get it on the ground floor here. And I think there's something to that. And I think that's the reason why this means so much this weekend, as it ties in. But in terms of writing about sports, it just gave me an entirely different perspective on what storytelling was, is, and should be.
Well, also, it is, just to follow up, Mike, on that, I'm sure you've heard the term no cheering in the press box. Yeah. The idea being that journalists, we don't cheer. Well, there was no chance of that, obviously. and Mike was the star columnist. I actually was the managing editor. I didn't write sports here, of all things, which is kind of funny. But it's amazing the number of sports journalists who do, as you mentioned, who've come from here. And I really do think, Mike, that it is the fact you had to find the story other than the victory story, the winning story. And also, we could be journalists because as much as we wanted it to happen, it wasn't, so you then threw yourself into the coverage of the game.
There's still stories to be told, and you have to tell them in a way that makes people want to read them, or listen to them, or hear them. And it does, you're not intellectually lazy relying on the greatest triumph. There are rich stories to be told from people who work just as many hours and just as hard and don't win.
Rance, what did you learn from being a sports writer?
I learned, I think the most important thing about being a sports writer is that you know that your leads don't have to be the normal kind of leads. You can be a lot more flamboyant, and it's a lot more fun, I think, and it's a great lesson to learn because even though I don't write sports anymore, a lot of those kinds of leads have gone into the stories I've written about advertising and marketing and insurance and other subjects like that. Subjects don't have to be dull, and I learned that at Northwestern. I learned a lot of stuff. I learned to write under pressure. I learned to shut out everything that was going on around me and just concentrate. I learned to write fast. I used to listen to the basketball games on WNUR and write up a story and get it in the Daily Northwestern the next day. And that was great training. Yeah. So I think most of the discipline that I've learned in journalism, it all started at the Daily. and I'm very thankful.
George, I often chide our current editors, many of whom are here, about writing so much about non-Northwestern things. They write a lot about the city of Evanston and district, and I'm like, you know, we're the campus paper. So I'm reading your stories, and you're writing about Idi Amin in Uganda and Michael Bolandic. You're writing a lot about non-campus things. Was that a precursor for your career? First off, why do you think that was important to have in the Daily Northwestern?
The world was my beat. I mean, it was the off-campus bureau, so, and I think it was me. So those were and these were always stories that had captured my imagination, but nobody was going to pay to send me to any of these places. So one of the things that it was actually journalistically very valuable, there are experts on any subject in the world right here at Northwestern. So as you know, I don't remember a lot of my stories. I remembered a couple.
You'll enjoy the archives.
Well, I remember I interviewed Milton Friedman on a story once, and who I later interviewed in my Tribune career and actually wrote about the very adverse reaction to his policies in Chile many years later. But I met him actually through the Daily, and I just called him up one day and he talked to me, which was amazing. I remember doing a story about Cuba policy with John Coatsworth, was a professor at the University of Chicago, where he was in charge. He later became the head of their Latin American Studies program. So I had two incarnations in Latin America as a correspondent. He became a very valuable source for me for many years. And I first met him by picking up the phone at the Daily and calling him. I don't know how we did that because we didn't have Google, to find these people.
It's
but
funny. You had to be a good reporter.
We had phone books.
We had phone books, is what we did. It was amazing. You opened it up and looked.
It's like the typewriter. Nobody's going to know what a phone book.
I know, exactly. What's a phone book?
But I wasn't at the Daily that long, frankly. I just worked here my freshman year. Then I went off to work for a chain of community newspapers in the city that doesn't exist anymore, the Lerner home newspapers. And I wound up actually becoming a sports writer because I started a sports section there for them. But the lessons, because I had clips, I never had a byline before the Daily. And actually, I think I wrote a bunch. I must have been scared.
You did write. You write more than you remember.
And so that gave me entree. And I learned a lot of really valuable lessons there.
Donna, you were writing at a really interesting time at Northwestern. The 60s, the campus is roiling, the nation is roiling. We have sit-ins and protests. What is it like to be editor of a student newspaper in those times?
It was just absolutely incredible. I mean, and actually we knew then. I mean, we took ourselves so seriously. When I went back and looked at some of these stories, I sort of thought, was that right that we took ourselves that seriously? And then I read the stories, and I sort of liked my 19-year-old self. It was okay, And I sort of thought, yeah, it was right to take that seriously because it was serious business. So, I mean, civil rights and civil liberties and the war, the anti-war movement, that's what was going on. So
was it difficult to stay away? I mean,
to
get involved and to stay as a recorder of events?
It was very, very hard. In fact, one of my favorite pictures of me from college is of the sit-in. I think there's a Daily where they closed, where they closed Sheridan Road, right? And that happened the week after I stopped being editor. So I could go. And that was the first demonstration that I got to go to as a person, not as a journalist. And there's a picture of me sitting cross-legged, with holding a candle, which I had never done in 4 years. So that was amazing. But really, I want to get back to the Daily because, and especially for the students who might be here, you think that you can't really do anything and that you don't really have a voice, but it isn't true. I mean, you're really very powerful, and it's a precursor of what's going to happen when you're a professional journalist. And